I saw some big executive orders in there. Some of these things are going to have effects right away, it seems, and with this pace, they hit the ground running. We should see that continue apace for the next few weeks.
Welcome to the Debrief, Carolina Journal's weekly recap of major developments in North Carolina politics and public policy. I'm Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation, sitting in for Donna King, the editor of Carolina Journal. She'll be back in action next week. We have a very interesting program, and we're going to be focusing on all of the major developments in North Carolina, and including some of the North Carolina-based events that are taking place in Washington, D.C. as well. Joining me for the conversation are two of our stars from Carolina Journal, Jeff Moore, who is the deputy editor, and Brianna Kramer, who is our legislative reporter. And thanks for both of you for joining us. We're going to be talking a lot about Trump coming up because Donald Trump officially became president again, entered the White House. But before that, the big issue in North Carolina politics, as it has been now for a while, has been this race for state Supreme Court, which seems to not be resolved. One of the things that we saw this week was that the state Supreme Court has decided to kick the case of Jefferson Griffin and Allison Riggs back to Wake County Superior Court. Jefferson Griffin had filed a complaint directly with the state Supreme Court in December, in the middle of December, asking for an order that would block the State Board of Elections from certifying Democrat Allison Riggs as the winner in this election. The case got kicked to federal court, went back to the state Supreme Court. The state Supreme Court issued an order earlier in January issuing a temporary stay. But this week, the Supreme Court came out with an order saying, no, we're going to not issue this order that Jefferson Griffin wanted. Goes back to Superior Court. Meanwhile, a temporary stay is in place so that there will be no certification of this election while the court issues continue to move forward. The other major development in this case is that the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals is also hearing the arguments, and the Fourth Circuit will hold oral arguments in the case on Monday. So no resolution this week, perhaps a resolution in the next few weeks, but who knows? Jeff, you've been following North Carolina politics for a number of years now. Have you ever seen anything like this?
Yeah, no, we've had some close races, and we'll remember that Chief Justice Newby was in a close race where they had to do a recount, and I think it was only 400 votes or so that separated them. But even that was finished by Christmas time. So now we're going on weeks, months after the election. It looks like we won't have resolution for another couple of weeks. And so it's very interesting from the perspective of the election lawfare that kind of goes on, all the different levers they can pull to try and delay or stall or to get some of these votes deemed invalid. But the writing seems to be on the wall already. And you saw some of that with some of the dissent at the Supreme Court level with Justice Dietz actually pointing out that some of these arguments, he would not put them up to snuff to actually revisit this, especially because it could change the result of the election. They kind of want to stay out of that. So that may have informed some of the motivation to push it back down to the Superior Court, because it would have been even though it's kind of prescripted in the Constitution that the Supreme Court would have to deal with this eventually, like they would be the House to do it, it did feel weird for the Supreme Court to be ruling on who is going to actually join them in the new session that starts up in February.
Yeah, you mentioned Chief Justice Newby. In this latest order that came out from the Supreme Court, he had some interesting things to say. You also mentioned Justice Dietz. He was the only justice who was able to write about this case this time around who didn't. Every other justice had something to say. And Chief Justice Newby wrote an opinion basically defending Jefferson Griffin's attempt to use the legal process and saying he's not trying to disenfranchise voters, he's just using the legal process. And basically, Chief Justice Newby also pointed some blame at the State Board of Elections for all the delays, saying, hey, if they wanted this thing resolved, they wouldn't kick the case to federal court when it belongs here in state courts. It's very interesting. Brianna, this is your first time dealing with North Carolina elections. I'm guessing that you didn't have on your bingo card that we'd still have an election not resolved 2 months after Election Day, now closer to 3 months.
Definitely not. No, I was not expecting this to be the case. I mean, yeah, like you said, back in November we had elections all across the country, and yet this is still ongoing here in North Carolina. So it's surprising how long it's taking and how many back and forths this situation has had and has unfolded to be, and now it's gained national attention, and we've had major news outlets talking about it as well. So because it's the North Carolina Supreme Court, it is a big deal for this to be ongoing when it was not only supposed to be completed back in November, but also the new candidate was supposed to take office already. So it is surprising and ongoing still. So I think a lot of people are watching and gonna, I don't know, hopefully get it resolved soon here in the future.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what happens. More on this next week because of the Fourth Circuit and its oral arguments. Now let's move to Donald Trump. Officially this week he took the oath, became the 47th president after he'd been the 45th president, and came out swinging. He was, right after taking the oath, he's signing executive orders. When he first took office in 2017, he had signed one executive order. This time around, like a couple hundred different things. Jeff, what stood out to you from what President Trump was focusing on?
Yeah, so he is a showman through and through, and so you saw that in the presentation of how they did this. They had a little desk set up at the rally to where he could start signing them in front of all of the rally goers there, having people hand him and explain that this one is for removing the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement, and the crowd cheers, and he goes on and signs them, and then he signed several more in the Oval Office, and actually bantering with the press all the while when they're asking him questions, something we haven't seen for a few years too. But there's some big ones in there, one being the national emergency declared around the border security, and the actions that are actually following from that, because in just the first week of his administration, we've already got media stories out there about MS-13 gang members, illegal aliens and criminals, people with lots of convictions that are in the country illegally being arrested and deported. So you've got some stories out there about that. Also, the national emergency declared around energy in the United States, which is something important as they move forward with policy. And relatedly, one of those orders was removing the United States again from the Paris Climate Agreement. So you see him actually pivoting back to a lot of positions that he had in his first administration, and trying to really kind of spark some reforms as far as how free we are to develop energy in the United States, not just for the economy, but for national security as well. To be able to actually export some of this energy too, to help some of our allies and friends that are dealing with some unfriendly situations, like in Europe, where they get a lot of their gas still from Russia, which they are at loggerheads with over the Ukraine issue. So I saw some big executive orders in there. Some of these things are going to have effects right away, it seems, and with this pace, they hit the ground running. We should see that continue apace for the next few weeks, and we'll have even more to talk about.
Yeah, those of us who remember the old I'm just a bill, Schoolhouse Rock thing, this is not exactly how that operates. This is not Congress acting. This is the president acting on his own. Brianna, you also saw some of these executive orders, and some of them really caught your attention.
Yeah, that's right. So Congress has been really focused in the past couple of weeks on addressing the southern border in an array of different bills that they've been pushing forward and passing. And we've seen this week President Trump is very focused on that as well. One of the executive orders that stood out to me is the birthright citizenship executive order. It was called Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship. And what that does is excludes citizenship status from two situations of people being born here in America. And that's if the mother is unlawfully in America to begin with, or if the mother is legally here, but she's here on vacation or on a visa, and she's not actually a citizen of America. And also in both these situations, the father is also not an American citizen. So right now, if somebody comes to America and they have a baby here, that baby becomes an American citizen. And so this would be putting an end to that.
They sometimes call that birth tourism.
Yes, that's right. And so this would kind of clarify the 14th Amendment a little bit. Specifically, subject to the jurisdiction thereof is the controversial part, where Trump is saying that is not the jurisdiction thereof for somebody who is not already an American citizen, the parents. But then we have others on the other side, and Democrats who are now filing a lawsuit who disagree with that in the Constitution, that 14th Amendment and what it does.
Yeah, I was going to mention that this is one of the first actions for our new state Attorney General, Jeff Jackson. He's joined attorneys general in 17 other states, filing a lawsuit within a day, I think, of that executive order challenging it. So this will be a way that North Carolina will be involved in this process as well. You also were interested, I know, in one order that federal government workers are probably watching very closely.
Yeah, that's right. Another executive order that he just signed is going to require all federal employees to get back into the office, so kind of change up what has been the norm since COVID of working remotely for part of the week or full time. We did a Waste Watch series on CarolinaJournal.com last month covering all of the waste when it comes to empty office space in DC and how much is spent, billions, I think $8 billion on office space and managing that rental space or what they own. I think the federal government owns over 10,000 empty or partially empty offices. So a lot of waste, and that goes right into the new Department of Government Efficiency, there we go, and just all of their efforts now coming forward to reduce waste. And so with this new order mandating employees get back into the office, I think we could potentially see a new wave of employees exiting the federal government as well, and I think that it may be what they're encouraging by signing this order.
Yeah, and I know one thing that could be of interest here in North Carolina is if all these federal government workers have to go back to work, those who are working in RTP could cause more traffic on I-40 for anyone who has to take that. So we'll be watching very closely as Donald Trump continues his work, and with more executive orders, I'm sure, on the way. Speaking of President Trump, he's also heading back to North Carolina. He's going to be visiting Western North Carolina. Jeff, this is probably no surprise, given the devastation that we saw from Helene, to see President Trump having a visit.
Yeah. So this will be his first domestic trip into Western North Carolina, the hardest hit areas from Helene and all the flooding there. So this is a pretty obvious choice from kind of a political PR perspective, from a human perspective, just to go and visit with those people to try and get things turned around as quickly as possible there. And it reinforces goodwill with a region that favored Donald Trump in the presidential election pretty heavily, and then also reinforces the campaign narrative that the Biden bad narrative as far as the mismanagement of emergency personnel, FEMA, and the response there, to really not do a very good job. So he's been hammering them on that. He'll probably hammer the previous administration when he's there, and maybe announce some actions that they're going to be taking to better address the kind of challenges that they're dealing with. We've seen the DOT actually get a lot of the roads back up. We've got a piece on CarolinaJournal.com about how many of those roads that were impassable were closed entirely in the aftermath, but I think 87 to 90% of them are actually back open. So there's some progress being made, but you can expect some more attention from the Trump administration, not just with the public visit here, but going forward as far as the congressional moves to address some of the funding challenges, but also the federal government and how they deal with these things in the future.
And Brianna, you also had some interest in Trump's upcoming visit and the impact in Western NC.
Yeah, that's right. He made an interesting comment about the future of FEMA and its role in responding to emergencies around the country. On Wednesday night, he said, quote, "FEMA is going to be a whole big discussion very shortly because I'd rather see the states take care of their own problems. If they have a tornado someplace, let that state take care of it." So I think that's interesting for here in North Carolina because we're relying on FEMA, but we're also relying on the state government, and just like every other state, how do you respond to that emergency, and how has North Carolina responded to past hurricanes? It's a big issue for North Carolina residents and how we move forward in responding, and if the federal government has less of a role, more of a role, or in funding maybe to the state, but maybe backing off of the FEMA response a little bit.
Yeah, I'm guessing that you are expecting, as the General Assembly comes back to town, that one of the main things that you and your Carolina Journal colleagues are going to be focusing on is what the state is doing and how it's responding to Helene, because we know that's been a focus. Senator Berger, Speaker Hall, lots of people saying we need to do this better than we have in the recent past.
Yeah, state legislators are keeping their eye on Western North Carolina, and that's going to be their main focus when they come back next week in passing more legislation more funding and more aid to help Western North Carolina.
Well, it's going to be very interesting, and Brianna already teed it up that we'll be talking more next week about what's happening with the General Assembly as it really gets back down to work with the business of the state. Jeff Moore, Brianna Kramer, thanks for joining us. My name once again is Mitch Kokai. We thank you for watching this edition of The Debrief. Be sure to like, subscribe, do all those things on social media to support this program and let us know what you think about it. And we will be back next week with another edition of The Debrief.